So hello everybody and welcome to this webinar in the Reimagining Our Future series. This is actually the second series and it's focused on small businesses, and so we're calling it Think Small First. The webinars are a series inspired by Professor Alan Gibb, who many of you know, and Alan was a pioneer in the field of small business and enterprise. He established a small business centre at Durham University, which became a leading centre for enterprise and small business development and growth worldwide. So this webinar is looking at business growth, scale and emergence. If you go back to the work that was done in the late 70s and early 80s, it established small businesses as the enterprises that generated the majority of new jobs in any economy, and nowadays represents the majority of employment in most countries. However, what that work has also established is that only a small proportion, so 3 to 5%, maybe 6 to 8% of small businesses grow or grow rapidly. And so there is this interesting challenge between the significance of the small business sector as a whole and the small number of small businesses that grow and grow rapidly. And growth to scale, which is something that people talk about. We hear a lot about unicorns, for example, which are privately owned businesses that turn over at least $1 billion in the tech sector, a pretty rare, or even rarer still. In January 2020, for example, there were just over 600 worldwide, of which about 2/3 were in China and India. And the other reason that we've focused on this is that with coronavirus over the last 15 months, 18 months or so, many businesses, most businesses have faced some fundamental challenges around growth and have responded in different ways. So there's been a significant impact on the growth of businesses in recent months and recent years. And then there's a final component to it, which is, of course, the debate around what growth is. And one example of that is smarter growth. So is GDP growth the right paradigm anymore? Is more sales the most appropriate approach, or is it smarter, more sustainable growth? And just to give you a couple of flavors of Alan's work, Alan worked in this area around business growth for many years. He undertook the research funded by the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry, in the UK in the early 80s. And out of that came a growth program which was offered globally. And in fact, Tim Atterton, one of our panelists today, was very much part of rolling with that globally and picked up by many business schools. When Alan undertook the original research, the Department of Industry offered funding on the basis that Alan would go and talk to bank managers and accountants and the other stakeholders and intermediaries who worked with small businesses. But at that point, the paradigm wasn't to talk to the businesses that were growing themselves. And so, of course, what Alan did, it was very much part of the founding of the Small Business Centre. Initially, when he spent the first few months in a business in the northeast of England, Alan's challenge back to the department, which obviously is the industry policy-making body in the UK, was very much to say, no, there's only one group of people I want to talk to, and that's people who are running, owner-managers and entrepreneurs running their own businesses. And that, of course, then underpinned and created the voice of the small business. Similarly, in a paper that Alan wrote in 1999, 2000 for International Small Business Journal, he challenged some of the fundamental constructs and ideas around growth, and used an example of the village store in the village where you had a small house that in the Lake District, to demonstrate that what a statistician would see as 4 new businesses over a 10-year period was in fact the same business, either passing over to people in the community to run it as a village shop and post office, or was a successive iteration of that same business, and therefore actually there was no growth, even though according to official statistics, business growth effectively was quite considerable in that particular small community. And then I think the last point that Alan made very much around the growth program work was that growth is very much a story and an experience of the individuals who go through it. And so going back to that original research where Alan interviewed and engaged with 40 different businesses with colleagues from the Small Business Centre, there were then effectively not the single perfect policy definition that the Department for Industry wanted in terms of growth, but there were 40 different definitions, descriptions, and experiences to demonstrate the diversity of growth. So maybe some themes for the panel. I'd like to start by introducing them, and then we'll open up. I'll talk through the format as well, and then hopefully we can have the stimulating interactive discussions and debates that we've had in these webinars previously. So to introduce the panel, we have, first of all, we have Tim Atterton, who used to work at Durham University very closely with Alan, is Managing Director of Business Dynamics in Perth, Australia, and has worked on business growth for many decades and business transformation. We have Sally Waterston, who's non-executive chair of Waterstons, a people-first technology business. And we have Donald MacKenzie, who's co-founder of the Islay Boys company and co-owner of Islay Ales company. We do have an apology. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Levo from South Africa, is not able to be with us today for unavoidable reasons, and she sends her best wishes to the panel and wishes that she could be here with us to enjoy the discussions that we're about to have. So let me start, and for those of you who've been on these webinars before, the absolute key to success for these webinars are the questions and comments that you make as members of the audience. They'll come up in the chat function. If you could please frame questions to the panel, that would be great. That's the fuel that drives the discussion and the debate. But I'd like to start by asking a general question to the panel, and then we can open up from there. So the question to ask is what do you as a panel feel are the future prospects and possibilities for growth of entrepreneurial ventures, and how, if at all, has this been affected by the pandemic? So Donald, if I can come to you first, and you unmute to address that question, that would be great.
Hello, Andrew. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming along. Well, it's a big question. I think again, I come from a very small business approach, so very much I feel an ant on the carpet viewpoint. But again, for us, we try to remain convinced that for a small business like ourselves involved in food and drink, that people still need to, well, eat and drink. And that while there are very many stressful factors involved with COVID and other factors, certainly in UK Brexit, but we'll possibly get to that, the simple fact is that it's lunchtime and people around the world are having lunch, and they're eating and they're drinking and they're interacting with other human beings, their colleagues or their family. And so while there are very many stressful factors that perhaps cause a lot of us to have perhaps less sleep than we would otherwise like, that remains a truism. And so from my perspective and my business partner's perspective is that we will continue at our very small level to address that essential basic factor of human existence. Social and commercial interaction, eating and drinking, rest, still remain a constant and a factor today as yesterday and as tomorrow.
Great, thank you, Donald. And Sally, over to you.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Yes, I think actually what Donald said is incredibly important. This is a huge question. When I saw this question, I thought, gosh, that's such a massive question. It's like asking, what are people like? Because every business is different. And I think that, I mean, I can, even within our business, we're sort of a perfect example of how businesses are affected in different ways by outside factors, by things like Brexit, by the pandemic. So in our business, because we're a technology business, parts of our business have been almost stressfully busy because we've always allowed people to work from home or coffee shops and things. So we've been asked to set that up for lots and lots of our customers who'd never quite believed it would work and now realize it does. So that part of business has been amazingly busy. But there are other parts of business where we write bespoke software. I mean, nobody wants bespoke software, when they're just trying to keep the lights on. That's not necessarily going to happen. We have done some because there has been some that have been related to the pandemic. But I think it's really important to know that every business is different. I think when you get a situation like the pandemic, I mean, I remember being told at school that creativity always comes out of disaster. That was actually talking about art, but I think creativity does come out of disaster. And I think when you get a terrible, difficult situation, then you do get amazingly entrepreneurial people who think of different things, think of different ways of doing things, and thereby start the initiative for new businesses. And you can see that. I work with a charity as well as being a non-exec for our company. I work with a non-exec chairman of a charity, which is an employability charity. They had all of their customers practically dried up overnight because they train people to repair furniture in the hospitality industry. So that was a major catastrophe for them. So the guy that runs it, who's absolutely brilliant, immediately changed direction and started making links with people who needed to distribute PPI, and they started doing that. And that's how they survived. And that's the sort of thing that you get. That's the entrepreneurial spirit that I think. I think that businesses will continue to grow and some will fail, but they will still grow. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Sally. That's really helpful. We might come back to a couple of points you've made there. Tim, if I could hand over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and good evening from the Southern Hemisphere to our listeners, and good morning to the Northern Hemisphere. I don't often work on a Friday night, so have to bear with me a bit. Look, can I put your two questions the other way around? Let's talk about the pandemic first. I mean, it's clear that many businesses have been really badly affected, and many won't survive. And in my part of the world, tourism, hospitality, and travel, of course, has been absolutely decimated. And we all know that small businesses tend not to have particularly strong balance sheets. So something like a 18-month pandemic is disastrous for them. But actually, I know many businesses actually that have had a really good pandemic. And I'm sorry to put it like that because it sounds inappropriate. But I know businesses that their sales have gone through the roof in the last 18 months. So I think we've got to bear that in mind. And as Sally indicated, the pandemic is actually just another form of disruption, a very serious disruption, but a serious disruption that the really good entrepreneurial people will find opportunity here. And when I have to admit, Andrew gave us advance notice of this question. So I went back to my dusty old files, and I found a quote from Alan when he was asked to define small business years ago at a conference. And I just want to read this to you. Alan defined running a small business is about coping with uncertainty and complexity and managing change as a means of personal fulfillment. And actually, the good entrepreneurs will actually find, as Sally said, opportunity here. And I'll just give you one example of that, if I may. I was with a company yesterday that made work boots. And before the pandemic, all their work boots were made in Indonesia. And basically, they just had a sales and distribution arm here in Australia. Over the last 6 months, they've spent $5 million installing new equipment and just recruited 28 extra staff to start making those same, well, not all of them, but about 20% of their production is now made in Perth. So, they're obviously managing their risk, but it's an opportunity for them. The government has helped them buy that equipment. But 28 new jobs have come out of this pandemic here in Perth that, previously have been in Jakarta. And I could probably tell you 6 stories like that, but I won't, Andrew, because I know we're time constrained. But to me, it's all about being entrepreneurial and finding those opportunities in disaster.
Great, thank you. Maybe if we can just stay on that theme for a little while. I mean, there are the point about disruption, disaster, and shocks. I mean, there are maybe a couple of ways of thinking about it. I mean, you could see it in terms of the classic Schmpeter creative destruction, a slightly Darwinian view, perhaps, where a business starting up can either compete with or knock out an existing incumbent but in doing so create new innovation, new vitality in the economy. You can also see maybe coronavirus and the pandemic in a slightly different way, which is it challenges and it shakes up people who've been doing things in a certain way for quite a long time and haven't had enough challenge or disruption to actually fundamentally question some of their models. And so a pandemic, as you said, Tim, is not necessarily a good thing, but it can lead to change and renewal and in a way that people perhaps wouldn't expect. I mean, it would be useful to get the sense from you as a panel, perhaps starting with you, Sally, because you made this point initially around your views about whether, and I don't quite want to say it this way because of everything that's happened, that the disruption can have its upsides as well as the real challenges that many businesses that have experienced over the last 15 months or more, and whether that might lead to new opportunities and different ways of doing things, or whether that might be a longer term legacy of the pandemic. But Sally, it'd be great to get your views on that.
Okay, well, I mean, I think the obvious legacy that we have is this understanding that people can work from anywhere, and I think that's a really positive thing, because I think that ties in with people having more trust in their employees. And it's something that we've always believed very much, that you trust everybody and you trust them. You don't measure bums on seats, you measure what they do. And I know that's not possible in, say, in your industry, Donald, because you're actually physically making things. It's easy in our industry because we're in technology and we can work from anywhere. I think that so in a way we've been very lucky, but I think that move towards an understanding that I think you've got to be careful that it doesn't go too far. I think you have to be careful that people do see that there is a separation between their family and their work. I think that's really important. But I think, I mean, our first non-negotiable in our business is remember that everyone in the business has a life outside the business, which is more important than the business. Believe that completely. And I think you've got to be very careful to get that balance right. But I do think it gives people more freedom to work in many industries in other places. And I think that's been a positive and a benefit, not just because people don't have to commute, but also because they're being trusted more, which is what we should do. We should trust our employees always. And I think that's a positive. I think it has been dreadful in some industries. I mean, I think in the hospitality industry, it's just, and I just don't, I mean, I think a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs in the hospitality industry have been incredibly entrepreneurial and done takeaways and changed things and done all sorts of good works as well, you know, feeding the homeless and things like that, and feeding children, you know, who need to be fed. And all of that is amazing. But I think it's a very unfair distribution of benefit and disadvantage in the world. And I think I can see both sides of that because of the work that I do with the Employability Trust as well as with the business. Our business has, yes, we were impacted. Obviously, it would be wrong to say we weren't, but we've come through the other side. We're growing, we're making profits, we're absolutely fine. We had a lot of cash to start with. We were always okay. We've been going for 27 years. Hasn't always been that way, but it's been that way for quite a long time. But I see a small business like the Employability Trust, where it really has been hand to mouth, but they've still survived by being incredibly creative. And I think yes, it does bring out creativity in people. It does bring it also, to a certain extent, I think, brings out the good in people as well. So our company in Australia, which is very small, in Sydney, they did some amazing things. I mean, they're not as well known as we are in the UK. They did some amazing things about paying it forward. You know, we're paying our people to be in the office. If you need help, we'll give you some help for free, but we'd like you to pay it forward with your customers and your suppliers. And I think that's, you know, I've probably talked enough about that. Don't want to talk too long.
No, 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 not at all. Thank you, Sally. That's absolutely great. Tim?
Yeah, I've forgotten what the question was, Andrew. I was too busy listening to Sally.
So I guess the question was really in two bits. I mean, you know, you could argue that the pandemic is a classic example of Schumpeterian creative destruction. It's knocks out existing businesses and new businesses are coming in, and that might be quite a Darwinian view of it, or it might be that one of the implications or impacts of the pandemic has been that maybe it's got people to think about what they're doing and how they're doing things differently and start to develop new approaches and new models. And I mean, in a way, you know, Sally's response is probably talking about variable effects, where both might be the case. But the broad question is, you know, around those two different potential scenarios and the extent to which you think they're playing through in terms of growth.
Thanks for that. I mean, I think that the next 6 months is going to be really interesting. I mean, business failures, and obviously I can only talk for Australia here, but business failures in Australia have actually reduced dramatically in the last, and I suspect they have in the UK as well, but in the last year or so, and our sort of business-induced bankruptcies and insolvencies are way down. But that's because of the aid that's been available. So the next 6 months is going to be really interesting to see what the real impact is. And as I say, I think it will be really significant because, not least of all, because of weak balance sheets. I think there's some really interesting issues about how businesses, as Sally was indicating, treated their staff and their customers and their stakeholders during the pandemic. And that whole concept, not just with staff who are paying forward, but with the whole network of playing forward. Because I'm naive and romantic enough to think if you treat people well, you get paid back. And I really do think that some businesses that treated their staff and their customers well will actually benefit. Just in terms of managing change, and as you know, Andrew, I like telling stories. I was talking to another business the other day that's actually closer to Donald's world, where basically they provide food to the retail sector and food service sector, frozen fish to be specific. And what actually happened is the food service sector, the restaurant sector, absolutely crashed overnight. So they lost half of their business. But what actually happened is the retail side of the business doubled in volume. And in hindsight, they realized that they'd got all excited by this new venture, which was to do with food service, and they were ignoring their core business. And now they focused on their core business, which was retail, and they're making the same volume at higher margins. So, I think that having the information to make good decisions and being fleet-footed, you could see some businesses really taking off. And just, if I may, just go back to your earlier question. Nobody knows what the new normal is going to be, and the new normal is going to change every day, isn't it? From what I can see, but perhaps I'm a romantic again, but I strongly suspect that in a couple of years, perhaps 3 years' time, we'll still be talking about 10% churn in the small medium business sector. We'll still be quoting the figures that you quoted, Andrew, that perhaps 5% of them are going to be growing of some sort. So, I desperately hope that we're going to go back to those days. And I hope that we have a policy response to that, because I'm a bit out of touch with what's happening in Europe, but I can tell you in Australia, there is no policy response in terms of working with growth businesses, no meaningful one, which I think is a disaster. And perhaps we might talk about that somewhere in this webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And we certainly will. It's one of the questions I want to come back to you as a panel on. Donald, it'd be great to get your thoughts on this as well.
Yes, yes, Andrew. I was listening with pleasure to both Sally and Tim, and a lot of their remarks have resonated with me as a very small business owner. I think it's interesting to dial in my ant's view perspective into that. And actually, Tim, you mentioned earlier about some companies doing well and perhaps a great many not doing well, Sally, and of course we're a bit in between. I have two hats. I have a whiskey business and a beer business. And the whiskey business is essentially it's off trade, so it's going through retailers, and the beer business, of course, is essentially on trade, so it's going through hotels and restaurants and bars. And of course, that sector, the hospitality sector, was of course dramatically hit by COVID. And I've got a kind of microcosmic view of these things, but we could possibly extrapolate, or possibly not, actually. But so one hand, one of our businesses just collapsed. But on the other hand, the people being at home and having more time, and having perhaps more time to think about their lives and think about their choices, led them to perhaps be more, I would like to say that probably a bit pretentious, but led them to be better consumers, because we tend to be consumers, speed consumers, perhaps is maybe a phrase I would use, when we're busy and we're in a hurry. So we go and buy things, and we go home and we eat them and we consume them, we read them and we watch them on our tellies or whatever. But having more time perhaps led us to reflect upon our lives, and that ties into perhaps one of the themes of this webinar. And it also perhaps led us, I would hope, and I would like to believe, perhaps this is erroneous, to be perhaps more aware consumers, and therefore to perhaps better choose what we consume. And I'm talking about food and drink, but that extends to perhaps culture and other things. And so, on a microcosmic basis, we produce what we like to call entry-level premium spirits. So people wanting to step up from perhaps more mass market goods and have a richer experience, well, they were stepping into our products and stepping into a retail sector, which was a specialist wines and spirit shops that perhaps they didn't have the time to go to before, didn't have the consideration for before, and so they were choosing perhaps more carefully, and that's perhaps an interesting aspect of that. I don't know if it is the case or not, but that's certainly our experience. And so our whiskey sales, that's a bit of a long preamble, sorry, our whiskey sales actually went up. So Tim, we were both one side, yes, I mean, the pandemic has been strangely beneficial to our whiskey business, and of course, but the other side for the beer business hasn't been, which I think is got an interesting perspective, because I've got both hats here, you know. But I think again, for a small business like ourselves, what it has done is it has perhaps, and Tim, you mentioned this too, it has focused us, our minds on perhaps breaking the ceiling, the glass ceiling, if that's the thing to say, to try to be more dynamic, curiously, and not to fold down on ourselves and to batten down the hatches, as it were, because that's going to take us nowhere. And so actually, it leads us to analyze how we get to our customers and how we interact with our customers. And perhaps we're looking here at supply chain issues and distribution networks, which I think, again, that ties into perhaps broader issues like Amazon and internet and things like that, which of course have revolutionized the buying process for the consumers that we are. But it has forced us to look at that and to see how we can better interact with our customers, and see how we can perhaps have to deal with distribution networks that are no longer the same as they were before. Having said all that, and again, I think, Tim, you mentioned this too, and Sally, again, we're looking at perhaps trying to be calmer and trying to say, well, you know, these things are dramatic, but in the great scheme of things, perhaps, you know, things will change, but people will still be people. Again, I tie back to my initial remarks, and so that we don't want to be overstressed by this, and we don't want to be anxious about it. We want to try to look at life as a positive thing, and tried to look at social interaction as a positive thing, and tried to look at commerce as a positive thing, as things that bring joy and sense to our lives, and to not lose sight of that within this perhaps somewhat stressful situation that we're all experiencing over the last couple of years. A couple of things on that. Growth for us therefore has become key, and so funnily enough, it's about trying to grow out with perhaps the business models that we had assumed were fixed and slowly evolving before. So that's forcing us to think outside the box, perhaps. But that again, I think for any entrepreneur, it brings its own interest, because that gives us intellectual stimulation, which I think we all need in our daily lives. And okay, I don't want to be glib about the challenges that we face, because so many businesses have gone down and will go down, Tim, as you say, once they've been taken off the stream of financial aid that's helping them survive. And my God, thank goodness they have that, and thank goodness we have had that too ourselves. But it's forcing us also to stimulate it, to stimulate our mental processes and try to think outside the box and try to create opportunity out of all this. And I don't want to stress that too much, because it sounds, I mean, I think we have to be also conscious of the drama that has unfolded, has unfolded, and will unfold all around us as people try to adapt, and in many cases are unable to, because, well, if you're a restaurant owner and the restaurants are shut, well, you know, again, you can, as Sally said, you can do home deliveries, and you can, but ultimately your revenue streams are going to be so fatally struck by that unless you have 10 or 15 or 20 years behind you of a treasury, then you're probably not going to make it. So while there are opportunities, and while we are keen to explore them, again, I do tie back into Sally and Tim's remarks that it will be it's a hard journey. I think COVID has underlined that.
All right, thanks, Donald. So we're getting some questions and comments in the chat function. That's great. If you can keep those coming, that'd be really helpful. So Simon Bridges raised the idea of Antifragile, which was developed by Nicholas Taleb, who wrote Black Swan as well, and you know, talking about it being a state where experienced adverse conditions makes you stronger. It suggests a mental approach, not of being robust by insulating from adversity, but acknowledging uncertainty and adopting appropriate approaches such as exploring effectuation, lean startup, and ready, fire, aim. I mean, it's interesting, the starting point to Nicholas Taleb's book is as follows. So he says, some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stresses, and love adventure, risk, and uncertainty. Yet in spite of the ubiquity of the phenomenon, there is no word for the exact opposite of fragile. And he uses medical metaphors rather than necessarily business metaphors to give a sense of that. But, you know, I guess the question to you as a panel is are we seeing the good bits in a pandemic that was much more problematic by trying to build a concept around anti-fragile, or has it been fertile learning ground for owner managers and entrepreneurs to become more anti-fragile? So Tim, maybe to start with you.
Gosh, no idea, Andrew, to be honest. I mean, it's clearly been an unbelievable learning experience. For, you know, a painful one for those that won't survive, but a very valuable for those that will survive and could go on well to do well. So I firmly believe that adversity does make you stronger. And you know, I've worked with many businesses that have been close to, you know, shutting the doors, not due to the pandemic, but for all sorts of reasons, that have somehow clung on and gone on to do wonderful things. You know, in fact, the original growth research at Durham showed that a lot of those 40 growth businesses went through periods of insolvency, albeit temporary insolvency. And you know, probably if you showed their books to an accountant, they might have said, close the door. So I think growth businesses inside and outside a pandemic, you know, learn from problems and come out of that adversity, not least of all technical insolvency. I have this gut feeling that there is and always has been a really good undercurrent of growth businesses in every local economy. And I don't think it's 4, 5, or 6%, Andrew, because that, those figures are interesting. But those figures, as I understand them, say that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% of businesses will grow, but only at some time in their life. It doesn't mean that 6, 7, 8% are growing now. And at any given time, it's probably only 1 or 2%. If you go back to the old research that was done at Warwick in the 80s and 90s, David Story reckoned that the actual businesses that were growing at any particular time was less than 2%. And I'm absolutely convinced they still exist. They're just quite difficult to find. They're not your high growth businesses that everybody talks about. They're those transformational businesses that to some extent are a bit anonymous. And I think they're still there during the pandemic. And I think my personal view I'm not involved in policy anymore, but I don't think we put in enough effort to identifying them and trying to find out how, if they want, we can help them. They sort of exist in a little underground, successful world, but they don't actually put the head above the ground very often, become identified. And I'd love to see more emphasis on that, both now and as we emerge from the pandemic and we turn to a new normal.
Great, thanks, Tim. Donald.
So reactivating my sound there. Again, Andrew, would you like to reframe the question? I think I'm a bit like Tim. Well, Tim's initial response, which was not sure. I think coming out of the pandemic, or are we coming out of the pandemic? That's a question. I think it's too raw, really, for me to draw any particular data, even in a microcosmic personal sense at the moment. I think we're still juggling and dancing and running on a daily basis, very much so, to try to keep the balls in the air. I think that's probably a fair analogy, while still keeping the daily balls in the air and projecting forward, looking to the future, and looking to grow. Tim, I'm tying back into that, looking to grow for ourselves, very much so, in the next year or so through investment. But yeah, definitely juggling the balls on all fronts, and it doesn't give us time, I think, and perhaps it's too early to look back on the last couple of years and to draw conclusions and from that, perhaps, Andrew. I would be loath to do that at this point. I think it'd be a bit half-baked. But certainly what it has done is keep us on our toes, all of us, and those that are still able to run, thank goodness, because so many have fallen by, if I can pursue that metaphor right to the bitter end. So many have tripped and fallen, or been tripped rather, and fallen and had unfair. Again, sorry, tying back to you, say unfair. I think it's a reasonable word. Hurdles put in front of them. People who otherwise would not have fallen because of what we would probably call an act of God. Let's not drag perhaps mythical creatures into this, but yes, I think so. I think it perhaps be a bit wrong of me to draw conclusions at this stage. I think it'll be interesting to do so over the next few years, and no doubt that will happen perhaps through yourselves. But anyway, I'll perhaps leave it there and pass the hot potato to Sally.
Yeah, thank you. And Sally, there's the hot potato for you, or the ball to juggle, to use Donald's metaphor.
Sorry, couldn't unmute myself there. I find this quite interesting. I find that phrase anti-fragile. I haven't read the book, but I find that phrase quite interesting. And the introduction that you gave us. I actually feel that, and I'm maybe being unfair saying this when I haven't read the book, but it sounds a bit brutal to me. And I think also, sort of leading on from things that Donald has said, if you do survive, and I mean, okay, we're very lucky now, we've been going for 27 years, and so we were in a good place, but we have had really difficult times in the past. We have always grown, actually. Interesting, Tim. We've always grown year on year, but I think that it's very easy to be complacent and smug about the fact that you've been successful, because I think there are so many external factors that actually can impact you. And I think it isn't necessarily a question of being anti-fragile or non-fragile or whatever it was. I think you have to be, because I suppose my total passion and belief about business is that it is absolutely about people. And if you take your people with you, you can get through the most difficult times. I remember once giving a talk to some Russian MBA students at the business school with an interpreter. I kept forgetting I had an interpreter, which was embarrassing. But anyway, and I explained that we always, every single month since the beginning of our business, have shared the accounts and the cash and everything with everyone in the business. And this Russian guy said, "I can't believe you've done that. I could sort of perhaps understand if you've shown them the good things, but why would you show them the bad things? Why don't you think they're going to leave?" And I said, because we show them the good things as well. And because we're completely honest with them. And we're still honest with them all the time. We have a comm session every Tuesday in which, at the moment it's remote, where everybody hears everything about the business, good and bad, because we trust them. And I think that is just, that is just so important. And I don't think that ties into being, I mean, I may be being unfair, but that doesn't sound anti-fragile to me at all. Perhaps it is, I don't know. But I think it's just really important to take your people with you. And I remember in a very early stage of our business when we had a really difficult time. And this is, if people ask me what my favorite memory of the business is, this is it. We'd had a really bad year. We were going to have a party, and the people in our business said, "Cancel the party, we can't afford it." So we cancelled the party. And then everything started taking off. So we did have a party, a very modest one. And at one point in that party, somebody got the DJ to play the Chuwumba Wumba song. I don't even know what it's called. They knock us down, we get up again. And every single person from the business and their partners got on the dance floor and sang that song about the business. And that is my favorite memory ever, because they did that. We didn't do that. It's not the person who's running the business who's anti-fragile and sorts it out. It's the people in the business that make it survive. That's what is important. Sorry, I'll stop now.
No, that's fantastic, Sally. Thank you. That's really, really powerful. And I think you make, as well as a story for the business, you make some really good points that this sort of fragile, anti-fragile is maybe too polarized, and people are resilient, and people nurture and people care, and that's all part of it as well. And we can get into too over-intellectualized conversations.
Can I make a comment? I mean, I love that, Sally. I mean, I've lived in Australia now for 22 years, whatever it is. And I can tell you that the biggest frustration of my business life for the last 22 years is exactly what Sally has talked about. The Australians, and I'm going to get my legs broken here if anybody in Australia is listening, but Australian businesses are terrible, absolutely dreadful at sharing information with their staff. And they say, "Oh, it's the tall poppy syndrome, if they knew how much money we were making, they'd want a pay rise," and all this rubbish, But it frustrates the life out of me, because they don't understand, in my view, if you don't share information, people don't respond to situations. And I come across it every day. And Sally, come over and do some talks over here. That would be fantastic.
Thanks. Tim, have you got any examples then of businesses that have broken out of that cultural mold and fought against it, or done
information? Yeah. Look, I know a business that has done well for every year, a bit like Sally was talking about, every year for the last 20 years. But when the pandemic hit, took a really massive hit, and the owner of that business wanted, for all the right reasons, wanted to protect his staff and didn't want them to worry and wanted them to understand they have job security, but wasn't communicating the reality of their situation to them. And it was very interesting when he eventually did start showing them some sales figures and what have you. actually they started responding in a, as Sally has indicated, in a fantastic way. You know, our sales went up by something like 25% because they thought everything was okay, because they had no reason to think otherwise.
That's great, thank you. So a few more questions and comments in the chat. Can I go back to one from earlier on? So Gordon has made a really good point, and again, maybe it comes back to that juggling metaphor in a slightly different way, that it's more important than ever to talk about private and business life balance, and the balance between entrepreneurs and their employees, which I think is exactly what we've been talking about. She asked the question around research, but I guess what we're also asking from user panel is specific examples of that. And I think this juggling metaphor is quite a useful thing, because of course, Donald, you were talking about juggling the now with the future. Sally, you were talking about, juggling in terms of the personal and being open as well, and working it through. Tim, you give some examples. It'd be great to get a sense about what this has meant on a personal basis to you as entrepreneurs and owner managers. I think you've referenced it, but Donald, it'd be get a good sense about that balance and whether you've got any of it at all, either now and the future, or in terms of personal and business. And then maybe to you after that, Sally, on there.
I think Andrew, and I think to all of the panel, of course, and all those listening, I think what has happened, well, is again, and please take what I say with a lot of salt, because it's very much a personal and it's a view of A, of business, and possibly B, of life too. But yes, I think initially I'm very much I think my wife would describe me as somebody who I don't have a work-life boundary, which I think is good and bad, because it means that I don't treat my work as something that is separate. It becomes it's a mix, and it ties into my life. And I would hope that I don't feel, I've never really felt work, and certainly since I've had my own company, certainly never felt it was a drag. I have an anecdote from a family member who used to dread Sundays, and I hate Sundays. And I remember saying to that person, "Why do you dread Sundays? Is it because, I don't know, it's just a kind of quiet day and it's all a bit, no. It's because Mondays follow them, and I have to go back to the office." And I thought, oh my God, it's something that just never crossed my mind. Because my immediate reaction was, well, you ought to change that. You can't spend a lot of your life doing something you hate just simply to pay your rent, pay your bills. I mean, my God, So I'm probably not a good example of work personal life balance. But having said that, I do tie in my family to what I do. So without trying to transmit to them some of the stresses and strains of that, I think that's not the case. But certainly, what I'm doing is a continual conversation. I think my family probably bored to death with what I do, because I talk about it all the time. But it was just part of my life. So I think, however, what to tie back into what the lockdown did is it stopped me from traveling, and it stopped me from seeing my customers, which was extremely frustrating. But it gave me more time with my family, and I'm lucky that my main home is in rural France, and so rural France in lockdown, and this is not the case for everybody. I hate to say this, so don't tell everybody, but it wasn't so very awful, because a little village in rural France, it doesn't change much. It's quite a quiet, peaceful place anyway, and all the more so in lockdown. So my perspective is probably not so fair, because for a lot of people it was awful, and they were stuck in small flats in big cities, and you couldn't do anything. And here's me out walking in the forest, with my wife and children. So it's given me time to get, I think, to get back into touch with. I've always been in touch with them, I think, but spend more time. I mean, it's a very simple and glib thing to say, but spend more time working from home, etc. Perhaps spending more time looking after myself. I became aware that sitting in front of the computer, as we're doing today, for your health, physical health, and even mental health, let's be honest, is not perhaps ideal. I think perhaps for me it's very personal. I started going for walks every day. Every day I would go for at least a walk of 3 or 4 miles, and I found that very, very. I can recommend it to everybody, by the way, as a positive thing to do for mental and physical health, and just getting back in touch with nature and things like that. And so small positives. This is perhaps turning into be a bit philosophical, but that was some of the stuff that I did. But yeah, I'm probably not a good example on separating perhaps personal and work life, because I've never done that, I'm afraid. I've never found work to be this heavy, draggy thing on the family that for some people perhaps it is, and I understand that. It's just never been my case. I've always tried to work with pleasure, frankly. I would hope a bit of passion, and certainly personal enjoyment and stimulation has always been a part of how I've looked at work, and particularly being an entrepreneur. If you don't get pleasure and stimulation, intellectual stimulation and mental stimulation and from it, then I think it'd be very difficult to do it. Sally, I don't know how you feel about that, but I don't think I could do it if it was like that, to be honest. And so because of that, it's always just been a kind of mix of work, life, family. It's all been mixed together in my life, actually. It's all one big pot being stirred every day. There you are. I'll shut up.
Thank you, Donna. That's great. Sally.
Well, I suspect that Donald is not unlike any entrepreneur, actually. I think he's the same as all small business owners. It's very difficult. I mean, for us, when we started the business 27 years ago, there were 3 of us, and 2 of us were my husband and me. So actually, that was pretty hairy, I think. I'd been a sole trader before that, and he joined me. I think it is very difficult when you run a business because you're so passionate and because you don't feel, I mean, I never felt that I could expect other people to do unreasonable things if I didn't do them when the business was small. So it was always Mike and I who were on call on Christmas Eve and things like that. I think as you grow, things change. And the most important thing is to take on people who you think are cleverer than you. Because to run your business, never be afraid of people who are cleverer than you, because, you know, they'll do a brilliant job. I think now I'm not in a good position really to comment, really, because I'm more or less retired. I mean, we're still sort of joint chair, and we still get, obviously, go have a lot of meetings and things with the business and go to the board meetings and things, but it's not the day-to-day operations that we would be involved in. I think from the point of view of people in the business, it's been very, very important to make sure that they've been supported during the pandemic, because if you think about the demographic of a lot of the people who work for us, a lot of them, I mean, we take on a large number of graduates every year, and a lot of them, when they join us, are single. They may have partners, but they're single. A lot of them will live in flats on their own. And certainly it's been a source of extreme concern for us as a business to support those people. I mean, to support everybody, but also to acknowledge that a lot of people have been, you know, stuck, especially last year, in flats and things on their own. And I know that some of their managers have been doing things like going out for bike rides with them, going for walks with them, when they couldn't actually meet them in a room. They were doing a lot to support them. I think it's hugely important that that's understood, and there's been a lot of programs to actually cope with that, and also some quite fun things as well. There was a gin tasting. There's actually a beer tasting, I think, tonight, all done remotely. Unfortunately, I can't take part in the beer tasting because I've got friends staying, but there's been a lot of remote things like that that have been done where everybody signs up, or they could go have a cheese tasting, and they received through the post a big box with all the gin. I mean, I have to say, Mike and I made total, you know, typical total backside of making the cocktails because we used all the wrong things. But anyway, it was hugely good fun. I think it's really, really important that we've kept in touch with people and that they felt supported and cared for. And it isn't a paternalistic or maternalistic thing, because you have to respect their privacy and their lives as well. But they have to know we've done a lot of work on mental health and had some very good podcasts. I think that's been important. We've also done a lot of work on doing free seminars on different subjects for our customers as well as our people. We have an academy anyway, but we've opened up the academy to everybody. I think all of those things are important, and actually help people to feel cared for and engaged. So yes, I hope I've answered your question there.
Andrew, can I make a comment? When we chatted the other day, I said, when we spoke the other day, Andrew, I said, despite the fact that the original, one of the observations in that original growth research was you can't separate the owner manager from his or her business. Now, 40 years later, that sounds very superficial and glib because it's a given. But, when the research was done, that was very insightful. And the way, Sally and Donald, I think it's the first conversation you have with, in my view, with an entrepreneur when you're talking about the growth journey. The conversation I would start with is, where do you see yourself being in your business in a year, 3 years, 5 years? Do you still want to be delivering the whiskey or running the academy or whatever, or do you want to be in a hammock, in the sun somewhere? But I think you've got to start with that conversation, the whole rest of the strategy, I think you can hinge around that. And it's the hardest conversation, in my view, to have with a business owner, because you're expecting them to close on things they don't really want to think about. So to me, that is a massively important part of how you support growth businesses, is that initial dialogue about where they see themselves in that business.
Thank you, Tim. You got through all that without the dogs yapping again, which is even better. So that's great. So, I mean, Catherine's just put a comment out, Catherine Panlino, which is really helpful around, in a way, I guess, Donald and Sally have been talking about how you create different kinds of community, if it's more online or you restricted on travel, and the support and mental well-being of employees, and how employers work through that is really helpful. Could I ask a couple of broader questions around growth? So the first one is we've characterized small businesses particularly as either whether it's 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, the growing businesses. And Sally, you've used your example of, you've grown every year for, a couple of decades more. So we have a group of businesses that might not grow, and we have a group of businesses that seem to grow. Is there not a third group? And I guess my question for you is this maybe not the biggest group, where there are businesses that grow, but they don't always grow? So they might grow and then they might consolidate, or they might grow and decide that there are other priorities, or they might grow and have challenges or whatever. So isn't the biggest growth challenge for that group that they might grow for 2-3 years, they might not grow for a while, they might wonder how to grow again, they might not be as interested in growth after they've gone through that first growth experience? I mean, is growth a constant or is it a variable? And I guess it would be useful to get a sense from each of you, both from your personal experiences, but from seeing and looking at and working with other businesses. And Tim, maybe to go to you first on that one. You're on mute, Tim.
I think the glib response to that, Andrew, is all of the above, isn't it? Because, every growth journey is a different journey. Something that interests me a lot here in Western Australia is essentially, they call Australia the lucky country for lots of reasons. And we've had uninterrupted growth prior to the pandemic for just about as long as anybody can remember. When we've actually gone into problems, And we, in West Australia, we actually went into a bit of a downturn about 8 years ago. A lot of businesses, actually business owners, put their businesses on the market. And there was a lot of business transactions, M&A going on there, because they said, we're not sure we've got the energy to do it again. And I thought that was an observation I hadn't come across before, to be honest. You know, that, and it came up as a bit of a shock to them, actually, that, you know, that there were such things as bad years, and you weren't going to grow at 10% a year or 20% a year. And I heard a lot of business owners saying, I'm not sure I've got the passion, quote Sally and Donald there, I'm not sure I've got enough passion left to go through the journey again. It'd be interesting to see whether that is a residue of the pandemic, and whether we get the same sort of observations if and when we come out of the current difficulties. Yeah,
thanks, Tim. And going back to Donald's point earlier on, people probably feel pretty tired at the moment because of where we are in the curve of the pandemic, and I guess what's its half-life for entrepreneurs in terms of having the energy. And Donald, you talked about 4 things earlier on. You talked about pleasure and passion and enjoyment and stimulation. I mean, it'd be useful to get a sense about your views about that in terms of this growth dynamic and the personal consequences and implications of it.
I think I can tell you, bounce back on what Tim was saying about fatigue, and probably pandemic fatigue will probably be a phrase that we'll use a lot over the next few years. And I can certainly see that, to refer back to those perhaps 4, there's probably a lot more themes that I kind of briefly spat out. I can certainly see that as an entrepreneur, if you don't have that passion, if you don't have that spark, as it were, and it might come from somewhere. I don't know where it comes from, but it has to come from somewhere. If that spark's gone, then I would probably suggest, then yes, I can see why for some of Tim's customers just wanted to get out, because if you haven't got the spark, it's I would suggest then it would be very difficult to go forward. Both professionally and personally, we can probably draw a parallel with relationships. If there's no spark, it becomes difficult to go forward, and I think that's probably true. Back to the growth situation. I think and again, this is everybody, and take what I say with a large dose of salt, but growth is essential for small businesses like ourselves, because without that growth, then we don't get to perhaps the space where perhaps Sally is now, or has been for several years, because you have to get to a simple and very boring cash flow situation, which allows you to pay yourself, pay your employees, pay your suppliers, my God, and to perhaps not have that element of stress occupying a reasonably large part of your spirit and your cognitive processes, and that growth is necessary, if only for that. I think what it would also allow, and I wouldn't mind so much the plateauing out of that, because I think once you get past that initial stress, financial stress, then that allows you perhaps to have more mental room to then, on a plateau thing, to look at strategy and look at long-term decisions on where you want to go and where you want to be, and analyze how best to do that. But I think the growth is absolutely essential to allow yourself the financial, simply boring financial situation to allow that. And I think that so many companies probably could grow, but don't get high enough up that growth slope before perhaps stumbling and falling and disappearing into the void. That sounds a bit dramatic, but I think that's probably very true, though. That, and I think while it's perhaps a bit dull, the simple fact of the matter is the financial health of the company allows the financial health of its employees and of its suppliers and of its customers, and I think that's essential. The growth is essential for that. And I think then that allows you a vision, a horizontal vision of where you want to go with the company. Do you want to stop at that sort of level? Do you want to grow? Where do you want to grow? Do you want to develop? I mean, again, for us, would it be new product development? Would it be new markets? Would it be, that's questions that we would ask ourselves. But we're still climbing up that slope. So yes, I would say I think the growth thing is an essential part, though, if only to parenize the company to a certain extent. And before I close on that, I'd like to just tie it back into what I was rabbiting on about living in rural France and how it was perhaps easier for me than for some other people, and to talk about the staff here on Islay, and luckily, or being in the west coast of Scotland, and Sally, I tied back into perhaps what you were saying. It's as you can probably all imagine, it's much easier to be to be less anxious again about COVID and its effects if you're on a romantic wouldn't swept perhaps is probably more appropriate. Rain swept certainly. Hebridean Island, where you can be in touch with a spectacular nature, that I do believe is a major health benefit, both physical and mental. And so perhaps for us, we didn't have the same stresses and strains on that with the company as perhaps more urban-based companies would have had. I think it would be very depressing to have had to work in an industrial estate in some bleak town somewhere and have to deal with that and COVID and all the rest of it. I think that would have been very harsh. For us, it wasn't our case. And so when I talk about my personal situation in France and working in the woods, I would like to tie that. Don't think I'm a callous bastard. I mean, tying back to Islay and the people here, they had the same thing, just perhaps a little less, wine and cheese. But I think we were perhaps privileged on Islay and in France with respect to that. Well, I know a lot of people were not, definitely were not. I'm just closing that. It was a kind of off the subject there, Andrew, tying back into a previous subject. So sorry for that.
No, that's absolutely fine, Donald. So, Sally, over to you.
Talking about growth, I think that although we have always grown, it is, I think, an inevitability that you go in steps. So you have steep growth, and then you will have gentle growth, and then more steep growth and gentle growth. And that gentle growth is your consolidation. I'm really interested in what Donald says. I think that the most important thing for small businesses is actually, this thing about turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. Actually, it's cash that's sanity, and it's cash that you must manage. And right from the very beginning of our business, we controlled our cash very, very carefully. I mean, for a very long time now, we haven't had an overdraft in Waterstons. We haven't needed one. And I think managing your cash, people don't understand the importance of managing cash. Profit is nothing if it's not turned into cash. And I think that is the biggest lesson that small businesses have to learn at the beginning, that growth in cash is actually a demonstration that you are okay. And it's exactly what you're saying there, Donald. You've got to know that you've got enough cash. Obviously, to get that cash, you've got to have enough sales. I understand that. And you've got to be making profit on those sales, but it's turning it into cash that matters. And I find sometimes with some organizations that I have been involved in, that there hasn't been that understanding of cash, and there hasn't been that understanding right at the beginning that you've got to be really firm but fair with your customers and tell them that no, you cannot wait for 90 days to be paid. You must be paid within 30 days. And you can only have that conversation once, and that's before you start working with them. It's pointless waiting till they're late payers. You've got to tell them at the beginning. And I think that is enormously important. I think there's a lot of things that have helped to grow. I think that's helped us to grow. The fact that we've always had somebody absolutely brilliant in our finance department collecting cash, who's always formed a really good relationship with our customers so that they feel it's really awful not to pay her. I think that's always been really important. The fact that we've always had brilliant people who shared our values, that's been an enormous thing to do with growth. When we interview people, and I'm not involved now, but I know I've had a lot of emails for a reason, a particular reason lately. I've had a lot of emails from people in the business. I mean, I keep in touch with them anyway, but I've had a lot of personal emails from them, from people who've been with us a long time, and from people who've just joined. And the people who've just joined have said that all the values that we set up 27 years ago are still there, and that, you know, they are so happy that they joined. I think it's that helps you to grow. It is definitely the people that help you to grow. And it's taking on, when we interview people, the first thing we're looking for are their values, not what they know, but their values. No matter where they are in the organization, whether we're interviewing anybody in the organization, it's values and attitude, first of all, then how clever they are. And then the third thing is what they know. Because actually, if you've got the first two, you can pick up the knowledge easily. And I think that has been, you know, some people sometimes have said to me, you know, explain why the business has been successful. And I'll say it's been really good recruitment. That's the most important thing, because it's your people that grow you. It's not you personally, it's the people that grow the business. So, but yes, you do have those sort of, you know, you do need periods where your growth is not so manic, because you know, it's balancing getting enough people and getting enough work, and that balance is quite difficult.
Great, thank you. And Tim, maybe a quick comment with you, particularly around that cash point. You've done a lot of work around financial dynamics in small and growing businesses. It'd be useful to get a little bit of a comment and perspective on that, Tim.
Yes, well, I just couldn't agree more with what Sally said. You know, the small businesses that will come out of this pandemic, you know, to fight another day and what have you, are those that have got good liquidity. And you know, there's loads of research that shows that financial literacy, the levels of financial literacy in small businesses is very low. They just don't understand their balance sheets, and it's not their fault, you know, and they only find out when it's too late. So, you know, I think I would, I don't really mean this, but I think actually making financial literacy almost essential for people starting in business is key. Because they look at a P&L which tells you everything and nothing, but none of them even have a balance sheet, never mind know what to look at. So absolutely. And I think it's gone further nowadays. I mean, the really good businesses that I see are those that are obsessed with data, you know, and those that are adopting things like Power BI and have taken it beyond finance and beyond CRM systems. And data is the key. And it applies just as much to small businesses as it does to your corporates. And I think that message is getting through, but we could do more about that.
That's great, thanks, Tim. And thank you, Barbara Henderson made a good point to reinforce your point about people first and the values, intelligence, knowledge as that hierarchy. You were talking about, Sally, and saying recent research in Worcestershire showed 41% of small business owners saying getting the right staff is key. Simon Bridges asked a really good question. Let me ask you, each of you. So, should we really be talking about growth at all? Or instead of growth, should we actually, not sometimes, but should we actually just talk about business success? Would that be a better way of framing it? Sally, it'd be great to get your views on that.
I think that's interesting, because success is different to different people. You're right. Success means different things. I think I can only speak for our business. When we set the business up, the three of us who set it up, our vision was not to make a huge amount of money, not to become personally millionaires or anything like that, but to actually leave some sort of legacy. Perhaps we were older when we set the business up, but to leave a legacy where we would be different. We would treat people differently. We would trust our employees. We would share our success with our employees, which we have. We have given away half of the shares in the business to the employees. We have a profit share. We've always thought that was very, very important. And I think we wanted to leave something. We wanted to give employment to a lot of people. We wanted to leave something that that made a difference to the community and also to the business world. So we wanted to demonstrate that technology was only a facilitator and that it would be used to grow and improve business. And that was the only reason to have it. And I think that's how we would see success. We wanted, I mean, we grew anyway. We wanted to grow because we wanted to take on more people, because we wanted to help more businesses. But we didn't grow because we've never seen success as personal financial success. I think so. For us, it's different. I mean, some people want to do different things. They want the Lamborghini. They want, we didn't really care about that. We actually wanted to feel that we'd made a difference. I sometimes, when I'm giving lectures, which I sometimes get asked to do at universities about the business, I always say that I do wonder if perhaps it's just that Mike and I are aging hippies, because we were at university in the 60s, and so have always had a complete faith in people and a belief that people are good. And we're humanists, we're not religious, but I do believe that very few people get up in the morning and think, I'm going to do a rubbish day at work today. People want to do well, and they want to be appreciated, and they want to be recognized. And I think that's really, really important. I mean, I'm really interested in that thing in Worcestershire, because you see, my immediate response to that says a huge amount about that 41% of small business owners. It doesn't say anything about the staff they're trying to get. That's my view. And that's very harsh, but it's the way I believe it, because you get the people you deserve. And I also believe that, and I will get off my soapbox, but I also believe that if people want to come and work for you, that is a privilege. That is a privilege. You are not doing them a favour. They are doing you a massive favour. And I have never, ever stopped believing that. I still get really excited if people say they want to come and work for us, or they say they like working for us, because that's a privilege. And that's not being cheesy. That is absolutely what I believe. So I don't know where I started there and where I ended up, but anyway, sorry.
That's great. That's perfect. So Donald, and another reference to cheese. It seems to be a little bit of an emerging theme. Should we be talking about business success and not growth, whether it's with
exactly. Yeah.
Yes, I think I'd tie into to certainly a lot of what Sally is saying. I think for all of us, it's I think to just qualify success in terms of personal financial benefit is a very, very shallow and ultimately probably depressing way of doing it. I think it's a multifaceted, and I think again, I mean, I have no issues with people who wish to become an entrepreneur because they want to have a Lamborghini or whatever. I mean, why not? I mean, the world's a multifaceted place, and because it's multifacets, it's fascinating. But I think for us, and for myself and business partner, I mean, we come from a small island in the west of Scotland, and perhaps, it's certainly financial success would be handy because we all have bills to pay. But ultimately, you can only have so many phones and cars and houses. I mean, it's really, I mean, how many Porsches can you have? You can drive 5 of them at the same time. So that I think that's perhaps not. I think taking away anxiety and financial anxiety, which for a lot of people, including myself, is probably one of these things that is a factor of stress in one's daily life. Taking that out of the equation would certainly be nice, but I think that's as far as it goes, really. For that, ultimately, how often can you eat a day? How often can you drink champagne and eat caviar without becoming bored with it? So I think the financial thing is a bit of a red herring. I think, sorry, I'm pulling the microphone out. I think a lot of it, well, certainly part of it, I don't know how much. I haven't really divided this up into a pie chart, to be honest. But certainly, we come from a small island on the west coast, and growing up, I mean, I'd have to go to university at 17, and a lot of my generation and successive generations have had to do that because we come from a small island off the west coast where you can't stay in your own community and thrive economically unless you're perhaps a farmer or a fisherman or whatever. And not all of us can do that, or have the opportunity to do that, or have the desire to do that indeed. And so perhaps a small part of what motivates us, but a small shining part, is perhaps to create something that would be there when we turn our toes up, and would still be employing young people here and giving them skill sets that perhaps they wouldn't have the opportunity to have, or certainly not here. They would have to leave here and leave their families and leave their parents and leave their communities. And on a small island, and again, this is very microcosmic, so forgive me, the dynamics are very, very reduced. And so if you have people leaving, then all that happens is we can become a retirees island. And that's not fair. There's no balance there. But to have balance, you have to have economic development. And in a tiny, tiny, tiny way, because we're hardly a big company, or hardly even a small company, we take pleasure from that, Sally. And I tie into some of the pleasure and enjoyment you get from that is trying to be, I don't know, would the word be benevolent, perhaps not right the word, but inclusive, certainly, and share, again, tying back into, again, what you were saying, Sally, earlier on, about sharing the tribulations and the joys of keeping a business going, and getting the feedback from staff, and that happens, and getting a sense almost of, well, I don't want to push this too far, but a sense of family, certainly a sense of community. Within that is a sense of joy, because then you transform the work experience, again, Sally, and this is probably what is the case in your company, it certainly sounds like it, into something that becomes more than just work, and becomes, I don't take that too far, but becomes at least a little bit fulfilling for all of us, including the staff, of course, including the staff, and becomes more meaningful. And becomes richer for that. It becomes a shared thing where we share that. And again, so perhaps for us, the growth and pleasure is a complex thing. And again, Tim and Sally, you were saying this. It's not as simple as simple financial success. No, that would be far too dull, I would suggest.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Donald. I've just got an image of you now trying to drive 5 cars at the same time, and I'll try to work that through and process that. Tim, your successful growth, what do you think?
Yeah, I was smiling here, Andrew. I was just reflecting, if Alan Gibb was part of this webinar, he would be busting a gut to say, if you define business growth or business success purely numerically or financially, turnover, profit, I think he would say, you just don't understand the life world of an entrepreneur or a small business. And I think if you start by thinking that, you lose the plot, to be honest. And I'm old and crusty enough to remember those original growth research responses, and you've mentioned it in your introduction, the fact we got 40 different definitions of growth from 40 different entrepreneurs. I mean, I remember one of them saying his motivator, if you like, was to be the major employer in Bishop Auckland, because there weren't any jobs there. I remember another one saying that actually he correlated success with his golf handicap. Whatever turns you on, really. Another one saying he correlated success and growth by the number of hours a week he worked. Somebody else saying he wanted to create a job for his 3 kids because nobody else would employ them. And of course it was said tongue-in-cheek, but that's the essence of running a small business, isn't it? And actually finance is just the way you keep the score and keep it going, isn't it? If that wasn't the case, then why do people keep running their businesses when they've got more money than they know what to do with?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. I think we're drawing to a close. What I'm going to ask each of you as a panel member, just to give you a sort of second or two to reflect on it, is what's your one key takeaway from this session? Well, we've covered a lot. I think we've demonstrated how personalized and, if you like, internalized growth is, plus how people matter and how community matters as well, and how that higher objective and goal is. But and I think we've worked through not just the pandemic, but broader points around shocks, disruptions, and how they can be both a positive force, but a huge disabler for many, and we can have success and disaster at the same time. So I think we've covered a gamut, a whole range of areas, but and I'll follow the same order we just did for the last questions. If each of you could give your 30-second takeaway from today, that would be absolutely great. And I'll start with you again, Sally.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to read the Antifragile book. The thing which I would take away, I think it's really interesting hearing from Donald and being reminded what it was like all those years ago, and all the things that, the sort of imperatives and things. And I loved the phrase that he did about, you know, in a crisis, don't batten down the hatches. And I thought, yes, that's exactly right. Don't batten down the hatches in a crisis. Actually look to see how else you can escape from the crisis. I thought that was fantastic. And I think a lot of the people that in our business have been doing that, and they've done an absolutely fantastic job. But I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. I knew that they were being entrepreneurial and creative and everything. But the one thing that they weren't doing was just trying to keep business as usual going. They were, and exactly the same with the charity that I work for. You know, almost immediately, the first thing that happened was an understanding. This is a charity that refurbishes all the outdoor furniture for Nando's every year. And of course, you know, that's not, you know, not really going to be particularly viable, although they have gone on doing it, but not in the same way. And suddenly, you know, and just seeing somebody who immediately said, right, what else can we do? Let's look around. You know, what can we do here? Let's just, you know, try and carry on as we are and sit here and gaze at our navels and feel depressed. Let's look and see what we can do. And it is, again, I think that thing about talking about people, you were delivering whiskey last time we saw you. It's actually keeping those relationships going, which you do, and which I've just had a conversation with the chairman of the trust this morning, saying that somebody has contacted him last night who he hasn't spoken to for ages, and just said to him, can we give you some work? And he's kept in touch with that person all through the pandemic. And it is, it's, you've got to be creative. That's what I would say. And I don't think I thought about it in the same way before this talk.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you, Sally. Donald.
Yes, I think what I take, I mean, again, this is a very micro business for me and my partner, and it's interesting, very interesting for me to participate with Sally and Tim and yourself, Andrew, and to actually understand, well, to get a feeling that actually what we're going through is a shared experience. It's not just us, and I think that's good, and I think that ties in from wax philosophical, but I think it ties into perhaps shared human experience. Then I don't know, take that away from the webinar, turning into philosophy debate. But certainly, I think what we have tried to do, and what I think what's come out through this is that you try to go through, and you try. I think within that, though, what I think I'd take from that is with perhaps a dedication. Yes, but certainly with a bit of pleasure and a bit of joy in it is probably what I'd take from this. Associated, and I tie back into Sally, associated to the human condition, and the fact that our interactions as friends or colleagues, or as business partners, or as employers or employees even, are tied into our ability to interconnect emotionally. And I think it's very important that we don't lose sight of that. I know that for us, what surprised me, I think, with being an entrepreneur, is a level at which it's a human business. Well, any business, I suppose, it's certainly ours, again, the microcosmic thing, but I guess yours too, Sally, from what I'm listening to. It's a human affair. And so what I take away from this is our shared experience as humans, as entrepreneurs, as this one, Tim, down under, but yet across the globe, it's a human endeavour, and that human interaction that is at the heart of what we do as entrepreneurs is absolutely key.
Thank you, Donald. That's great. And Tim?
Yeah, we've been very lucky here in Western Australia in relation to the pandemic. I won't say we're untouched, but we haven't been affected anything like what you guys in Europe have. So I've been thinking about small business during and coming out of the pandemic. And I remember a conversation, it might have been with Alan Gibb, it might have been with somebody else, but a conversation that went something like, entrepreneurial people thrive on insight and energy. You know, that's their lifeblood, is insight and energy. And I remember, I suspect it was Alan Gibb saying, you know, the world's full of energy vampires. And if you're an entrepreneurial person, you need something to combat these energy vampires that give you your fix and your mojo back again. And what's going through my mind is the pandemic has been the ultimate energy vampire, I think, for so many businesses. It sucked the lifeblood out of them, the passion, the enthusiasm. And what's going through my mind is it possible to create some sort of mechanism that re-energizes them, you know, in terms of a policy response? And irrespective of whether we give them grants or we give them loan guarantees or any of that stuff, how can we, you know, for those that are isolated and lonely and been in lockdown, how can we re-energize them to, you know, to fight another day and perhaps start thinking about growth and get their mojo back a little bit if they've lost it? And I think, you know, I'd like to perhaps explore that with some of my colleagues over here, actually.
That'd be great. Thank you, Tim. That's great. We're a couple of minutes over, so I apologise. I think it was definitely worth the extra 2.5 minutes for that summing up from Sally, Donald and Tim. And can I just conclude by thanking Sally, Donald and Tim. I think you've worked really well as a panel, highly complementary, able to give experiences and reinforce. So real thanks from me and I'm sure from the participants. And can I also thank the participants, and I'd also like to thank a whole group of people, Dinah and Mariu and Gay and Keith and Susan, who've all been incredibly busy organising these webinars and doing a great job on it. So we're doing this all effectively to build this debate and this discussion and think about the future. So a great discussion again. And just to close, I'd like to plug the next one of these, and it is around, interestingly, Tim, what you were just talking about, new business models, and we'll be holding that on the 12th of November. And to slightly paraphrase Tim again, I hope that this has given you a little bit of, this webinar has given you a little bit of your mojo back, and it's re-energized yourselves. Thank you all very much. Thank you.